Good morning, everyone. Hi. Is everybody warm enough? So I'm so cold, my nose is running, and so if I keep sniffing, that's what it is. I swear. All right. So good morning. Welcome to Thursday. My name is Judy Littlejohn. I'm the chair of Fact 2. I'm housed at Genesee Community College as the director of online learning. And I just have a few slides, a little bit of a chat for you right now, and then we'll move on to the rest of the program, okay? So, thank you. I can't see, okay. So, as we gather in a time of deep change and real uncertainty in higher ed, this chat is about resilience. It's about how we sustain ourselves and each other, especially when we feel tired, frustrated, or overwhelmed. We're pulled in multiple directions to innovate faster, to defend inclusion, to work harder with fewer resources. It's not just institutional, it's deeply personal. Higher ed is at a crossroads of emerging technologies, growing political pressures, and financial constraints. The federal backlash against DEI, legislative efforts to defund DEI initiatives, restrict curriculum, and limit academic freedom are all threats. The AI disruption is the promise and peril of generative AI in an era of misinformation and unequal access. So framing the discussion, how do we continue to center students and maintain our mission in the face of uncertainty? Educator burnout is real and growing. Burnout isn't anecdotal anymore, it's measurable. Emotional labor, AI stress, and policy pressure are pushing educators to their limits, and it's affecting our ability to show up for students. As Ed Beck shared in the experiential learning session yesterday, Jesse Stack Lombardo of Geneseo uses the term passion tax for the dynamic where emotional commitment is exploited in place of structural support, or the go-to staff and faculty on a campus. Yeah, I thought that was pretty powerful. Take on extra unpaid responsibilities. The burden unfairly falls on those most invested in student success. Burnout isn't just about wellness. It threatens the very things we're trying to protect, equity and innovation. And when we're running on empty, we scale back, we stop trying new things, and DEI work can become unsustainable. Then we also have federal upheaval, right? Our federal headwinds, from legislation targeting DEI to pressure on curriculum content, higher ed is under scrutiny. It's political and it's exhausting, and it's threatening inclusive teaching. AI could be a partner in learning, but many faculty experience it primarily as a threat. The effort to prevent cheating, redesign assessments, and stay ahead of new tools is draining. But what if we centered ourselves again? We talk about student-centered learning, but what about educator-centered survival? We can't care for others if we neglect ourselves. Let's talk about how we can refill our own cups. So let's consider 3 strategies: reframing AI and trust, recommitting to our purpose, and relying on each other. Instead of AI policing, let's try co-authorship, letting students help define ethical boundaries. Shifting from suspicion to trust improves engagement and saves energy. Let's see. Focus on AI and digital literacy. Prepare students to critically engage with information in an era of bias and misinformation. Recommitting to purpose. What keeps us here isn't compliance or ed tech. It's human connection, transformation, and purpose. Reconnecting with our own why is one of the most powerful antidotes to burnout. Consider reframing the narrative, DEI as student success and workforce development. Shift from politically charged language to a student success framework that highlights equitable access, retention, and workforce preparation. Frame inclusive teaching as an economic imperative. Employers demand diverse, adaptable graduates. And ensure academic freedom through institutional policies that reinforce faculty autonomy and course design. And strategy 3, relying on each other. No one sustains this work alone. Peer support, shared resources, and just permission to not be superhuman all the time can restore morale and creativity. So moving forward, what can faculty, administrators, and instructional designers do today to safeguard equity in their work? Build support networks, strengthen campus coalitions, connect with state and national organizations, and share strategies and ideas. Look to the future. How do we ensure that human-centered learning remains at the heart of higher education, no matter the external pressure? What we can still control. When national or institutional change feels impossible, we refocus our sphere of influence. Your classroom, your syllabus, your students. That's where the change happens daily. We don't need to choose between innovation and inclusion. We need to choose sustainability for ourselves, for our students, and for the future we still believe in. So much of what we're navigating right now, burnout, uncertainty, policy pressures, and the weight of rapid change can feel overwhelming. But even in all of that, we keep showing up. We keep teaching. We keep trying to do right by our students and by each other. That in itself is an act of quiet resistance and quiet hope. The work we're doing, when it's grounded in care, purpose, and equity, is the work worth returning to. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for that. Now let's acknowledge our platinum sponsor, D2L, by welcoming Dylan Turnowski. He's the D2L Strategic Client Sales Executive. All right, thank you, Dylan.
Good morning, everyone. It's a true pleasure to be with you here in cloudy yet beautiful Oneonta with the D2L team as platinum sponsors of this year's SUNY CIT conference. A heartfelt thank you to the organizers, especially Nancy, for bringing us all together to celebrate innovation in education. At SUNY, your mission is bold and vital to enhance the well-being and prosperity for all learners and citizens in New York State. That mission has endured, even as the tools we use to fulfill it have transformed dramatically. Now close your eyes and picture yourself at my high school in Regina, Saskatchewan in the late 90s. The school was brand new, just built, 4 quadrants, and in the center of each quadrant, there was a computer lab, about 40 computers to share amongst each quadrant students. So we're thinking about, I don't know, 120 computers for 900 students. Amazing. And that felt like the future. We're all going to learn in this environment here, classrooms on the outside, computer lab in the middle. This is the way we're going to teach and learn. This is the future. And today, that seems almost quaint. And I couldn't imagine the planners and the engineers at that time thinking that in less than a generation, that model would be obsolete. I haven't been back there, but I wonder how they're using that space today and if that's changed, if they've adapted. Although that prediction isn't as bad as my high school math teacher telling me that I needed to do everything in longhand because I wouldn't have my computer or my calculator in my pocket at all times. So sorry, Mr. Ricardo. The truth is, although today learners, they expect more. They want more flexibility. They want more personalization. They want more relevance in their courses. And thanks to investments made by the state here and to you folks, teaching and learning practices and research, you're better equipped than ever to meet those expectations. And when we stay at the forefront of emerging technology, we empower learners to turn their aspirations into action to improve their lives, their families, and their communities. And at D2L, we're proud to be your partner in this journey through Brightspace. And we're innovators at heart. But we never innovate in isolation. Educators and the learners that we serve and you serve are at the center of everything we do. And we ask ourselves when we build new things, does this tool meet accessibility standards? Is this the experience intuitive? And is it inclusive? What will drive meaningful outcomes for faculty and students and administrators? And does this do that? And over the past 25 years, we've been exploring how AI can support educators. And many of you saw the demonstration by our solutions engineer, Andrea, yesterday for Lumi Pro, our AI toolkit to save time in course creation. And we're also excited with Creator Plus, with H5P, to empower you to build more interactives and practices in your courses today without any HTML coding experience required. And we're leaning into these innovations because we've been listening to you. You told us that traditional tools and practices don't serve every learner equally. And we agree. It's time to build a more inclusive, adaptable learning environment. Our commitment to you is to learn from you, to grow with you, and to help you meet the evolving needs of your students wherever they are and however they're learning. Because if there's one thing that we know for sure, is that change is constant. But with the right partners, change becomes an opportunity. Together, we have that unique chance to transform the way SUNY learns, and in doing so, shape the future of education right across New York State. It will take creativity, it will take resilience, and yes, it will take a little bit of courage. But we're not alone. We're here with you every step of the way. So, are you ready? Let's go.
All right. So now I'd like to introduce you to Josh Eyler. Joshua Eyler, PhD, is Director of Faculty Development and Director of the Think Forward Quality Enhancement Plan at the University of Mississippi, where he is also Clinical Assistant Professor of Teacher Education. He previously worked on teaching and learning initiatives at Columbus State University, George Mason University, and Rice University. Eyler is the author of Failing Our Future, how grades harm students and what we can do about it, an indictment of the grading system in American schools and colleges, and a blueprint for how we can change it. And the acclaimed book, How Humans Learn, The Science and Stories Behind Effective College Teaching, which in 2019, Book Authority named in 100 Best Education Books of All Time. Called A Splendid Repository of Ways to Rethink How We Teach College by the Los Angeles Review of Books, it was named a Book of the Year in the Chicago Tribune. Please help me welcome Josh Eyler.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. To comment on it is cold, but when you're just going into Mississippi, where the heat and humidity have settled in and will be there for 9 more months, this feels a little bit refreshing, actually. So, sorry about the weather, but I'm glad you're all here. I'm honored to have been invited by the team to give the opening keynote. I know my friend Brian Dewsbury will be closing things out. He's amazing, so please stick around for him at the end. But when they first approached me, they said, yes, we're really interested. This is a conference on teaching and technology. Interesting. It's certainly not anti-technology, but it hasn't historically been something I've talked a lot about. But then they said the theme is human-centered learning. And I thought, aha, that's my jam. So that's what I'm going to be here to talk a little bit about today. I've called it Ariadne's thread. And if anyone out there knows Greek and Roman mythology, there's a story about the hero Theseus who travels to the island of Crete that is presided over by King Minos. And the king has a daughter named Ariadne. He also, strangely, has a labyrinth underneath his castle. And at the heart of the labyrinth is a man-eating monster called the Minotaur. Why he has this, nobody knows. It was the labyrinth is designed by Daedalus, who you might know from another tragic myth. But Theseus arrives and he has to kill the Minotaur. Now the problem is, once people enter the labyrinth, it's very difficult for them to come back, right? It's been designed so that it is tricky enough and shifts while he's in there that he's unable to, most people are unable to get back out, and that the Minotaur finds them and eats them. Ariadne, the king's daughter, falls in love with Theseus and says, Theseus, I'll do whatever you can. Theseus, never the most ethical of Greek heroes, right, says, yes, I love you too. Can you help me with this whole labyrinth thing, right? Since you live here and all. And Ariadne said, okay, I have an idea. I'll stand at the opening of the labyrinth and I'll hold the thread. And you take the other end and as you go through the labyrinth. And then once you kill the monster, you find your way back out again by pulling on the thread. So this works brilliantly. He gets to the center of the labyrinth, he slays the monster, he finds his way back out because Ariadne has been very true and faithful and loyal to him. He pops out of the labyrinth and said, gotta go, see you later, it's been nice. Right? So poor Ariadne is bereft of this. But the point is that we are going to talk about two of those kinds of labyrinths today that exist in higher education and that are very difficult to make our way through. But it is possible. So one of those, the current state of the world, and another of those, the current status of research on human-centered learning. So it's fair to say that there's a lot going on in the world today that has an impact on higher education. Judy outlined many of them, actually, at the federal level. If you're in my state, at the state level as well, our legislature just passed an anti-DEI law. The fall will be our first full semester reckoning with that. But there's also things that are internal as well. We're still bouncing back from the effect of COVID on student learning and the student learning behaviors that they bring with them into in-person and hybrid courses. The learning loss that is well documented having happened from, as a result of COVID. AI is shaking things up regardless of where we are on the AI, either acceptance or innovation or resistance spectrum. It is certainly changing the nature of the ballgame. But what I want to talk about today, how do we find our way through all of the chaos? Well, our psychologist friends tell us that we have to focus on our locus of control. What is our individual locus of control? You know, in our personal lives, that may be choices like not spending the morning doom scrolling with your coffee, finding something more productive to do, right? That's a struggle for me. But in our professional lives, what are we actually able to control? We cannot control what the federal government does. And that can be very frustrating, it can be alienating, and it can lead to feelings of not only defensiveness, but hopelessness as well. We can't control it. I watched some clips of your Assistant Chancellor's State of SUNY speech that happened recently. He's doing a great job, but he can't control it either. He has the right message that cutting research is cutting the technology benefits that will save lives. He's doing what he can, but he can't control it either. So certainly we can't control that. We can't control what our states do, right? I can't control what the legislature does, right? We can't really even control what decisions are made at the system level or the institution level. Our locus of control is our work with the human beings who are in our classrooms. That is what we can control. And in some ways, it is all that we can control. And that's hard to kind of embrace and accept. But I also think it's an important message and an important moment. If that's true, if I can accept that, I can focus significantly and totally on those people, those human beings who are in my classroom. So that is the way I think that we wind our way through to the center of the current events and find our way back again. We focus on the students and on student learning and doing what we can to best help those students to learn in the most effective ways possible. Now, that's no way to say that we haven't been doing that, but it is a suggestion, maybe even a plea, to say, let's put all of our attention on that. Let's not get distracted to the extent possible by the other things that are happening, and let's focus on them and their learning, right? So that's the other lever. The problem is, maybe the opportunity, when you start to think about how do human beings learn, how can I best focus on student learning, you immediately begin to run into a whole lot of misconceptions about how people learn. And so I'm going to walk us through that labyrinth right now, handling those misconceptions, and then I'm going to turn to what research actually tells us about how humans learn and how we can use that in the classroom. So we're going to tackle misconception number one. It's the granddaddy of them all. The misconception that we learn best when instruction is aligned with our preferred learning style. There are cognitive scientists out there who have spent their whole careers trying desperately to convince people of this, right? It is simply not true. A, that we have a preferred learning style, and B, that we learn best when we are taught using that preferred learning style. Right? So where did that come from then? It came from this guy, Neil Fleming, in 1987, who established this questionnaire called the BART questionnaire, visual, oral, reading, writing, tactile. You may have heard of this before, right? You've certainly probably heard of those categories. Some places even still teach this to people who are going out into the classroom, right? The BART questionnaire developed in 1987. Why did he do this? Well, he said, I was puzzled when I observed excellent teachers who did not reach some learners and poor teachers who did. So he moves to a university, he takes people who are around him, and he said one thing that seemed to hold some magic, some explanatory powers, preferred modes of learning, or what he called modal preferences, right? He used the students and teachers at his own university to try and prove that this magic was real. It didn't begin with research, it began with an intuition. I don't think against Dr. Fleming. But what I am saying is that this is not the kind of basis that you want to launch an entire movement in the field of education, right? Some magic out there. So this is where it comes from. He observed something and said, maybe this is what's going on. It then took on a life of its own, right? And so we've heard a lot about it. There's a lot of research out there, a lot of research to show that this is simply not true. His intuition is a similar intuition that many people who are when I first moved into the teaching and learning center world, I was working with faculty from across many different disciplines. I kept running up against the one question over and over again. And that question was not what works, what teaching strategies work, because we actually have a canon of research validated teaching practices at this point. For your discipline, name the course. There are teaching strategies that are shown to enhance learning. So that was not my question. My question was, why do some of these things work in some contexts and others not work in other contexts? That is what I was really fascinated by. And it sent me down an 8-year rabbit hole of trying to figure this out. Because that quickly led me to all these different questions about, well, how do people actually learn? Right? If I'm trying to figure out why some things work and others don't work, I have to figure out first, how do they learn, and why do they learn in one particular way or not? Right? And so that question led me even further down the pathway to many different disciplines. Because the truth about this is that lots of different scientific and social scientific disciplines have been studying learning for a very long time. But because of the nature of silos in higher education, they rarely are talking to each other about what they're finding in the research. So what I brought to this project was by training as a humanist to steer silo research and to try and create a narrative about the way people learn based on what I was finding from these different disciplines. Now that, of course, I had to learn a lot. In some ways, I was like a student for the early part of this research, learning from really effective teachers that I knew in these disciplines. But it quickly became a major project that eventually led to this book. And I was faced with so many different possibilities of how to frame this idea, how to pursue it, where to look, how to marshal together and manage all of this research. It wasn't until I found this book that the organizing principle and really the truth, I think, that underlies a lot of the approach that I took to understanding how people learn came from this, a book called The Scientists in the Crib by 3 really distinguished developmental psychologists. In this book, scientists are such successful learners because they use cognitive abilities that evolution designed for the use of children. Now, that doesn't say that children can be good scientists. We have known that for a long time, that children use a kind of rudimentary scientific method when they're learning about the world. We've known that. This says scientists can do what they do because they're using structures and parts of the brain that were evolved for children to learn about the world. And suddenly it all clicks. That this is not just a very rich story, it's a very long story, the story of human learning. That the way we learn as adults is connected directly to the way we learn as children. That the contexts change. A 3-year-old isn't learning calculus, but we are using the same structures and methods and infrastructure that has been designed for pursuing those questions when we are little. And the way children learn has been evolving for a very long time and has been absolutely essential to the development of humans as a species. Learning is at the heart of that story as well. So when you think of that, when you think of the long view of this, it's all deeply connected. And so you have to look through an interdisciplinary lens to bring all of that together. Once I did that, there were 5 major attributes that really rose to the surface of the research. And I'm going to talk about each of these for a second. Curiosity, sociality, which is really our social nature as human beings, emotion, authenticity, and failure. I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. Here. My excitement for this doesn't get overwhelming. Okay. So let's talk about curiosity first. Curiosity is the most foundational of the ways that we have always learned as humans. Okay? Explain why. But first, I want to ask you this question. How would you define curiosity if someone were up on the stage and demanding that you think about that question? Right? What is curiosity? So take 30 seconds Just think how you might define the concept of curiosity. Go. You can talk to each other too. There's no law against it.
No, it's supposed to. What? She's supposed to be? No, it's not. You hit that. Thank you.
Okay, that's exciting. I like to hear about curiosity. I'm not going to ask you to share, but I'd like you to keep your definition in mind. How many of you have had a definition of something like this? A biological drive caused by a state of arousal, or an innate biological need for knowledge. Anyone? That's not usually a popular venue. It is that these are the biologists who have studied curiosity. And the earliest, Dan Berline, the earliest biologist to really study this question, compared it to other bodily mechanisms that we have that are caused by a state of arousal. So think about hunger, for example. That is caused by, like, we haven't had food, and so our body starts to send us signals about that. We eat food, and the state of arousal goes down. He was comparing curiosity and the need to know things to that. There's something we don't know. We seek out that information. As we are doing it, our bodies are sending us signals that we need to know that information. It could be anxiety. It could be discomfort. It could be that thing in the back of your head when you are trying to remember something but can't quite get there and saying, I have to know this, right? It could be that, but that there are biological signals that we get, and that state of arousal goes down when we have the answer to our question, when we find the information. That's what he compared it to, and biologists since then have really focused on the idea of that drive to find novelty, which is a key part of curiosity, right? And many scientists think that it is the novelty, the searching for new answers and new information that really caused, or is the reason why curiosity is so foundational this way that we learn. How about this? An information gap, the distance between what one knows and what one wants to know. Anyone have the definition a little closer to that? Because these are the psychologists who study curiosity. Right? And that definition of an information gap has been the most important work in the psychology of curiosity that we have over the last few decades. George Lowenstein. Now, it's important to know, as with many psychological studies, this was an operational definition of curiosity, meaning it was meant to be tested in a lab, right? And so could you test the distance between what one knows and what one wants to know? And could you measure that? And so that's why he developed that particular definition, but it also resonates. Being able to identify my information gap about particular areas that I know well or don't know really well at all. There's more curiosity about things I don't already know than things about that are in the realm that I know well. Okay, I'm guessing that someone absolutely has this one. A release of dopamine, followed by activity in the midbrain, nucleus accumbens, and possibly the hippocampus. Possibly. Yep, exactly. Yeah, good. Now, these are the neuroscientists that study curiosity. So really looking at the biochemistry of what happens in our brains when we are curious about something. And I just want to share with you some of the studies they've done because I find them so fascinating. They used fMRIs, which is just a regular MRI with an F in front of it, meaning functional. So they studied the results to answer a particular research question. So they would put subjects into an MRI and then would ask them trivia questions, just like the kind you would get in Trivial Pursuit or pub quiz nights. I'm a big trivia fan, so this really appeals to me. They asked some trivia questions, and we also asked them to rate how confident they were in their answer. And so what they found as they were doing this, and as you probably know, what an fMRI shows you is where blood is flowing in the brain. Okay? And the hypothesis is where the blood is flowing, it means that those parts of the brain are active. Right? So what they found was when someone got a question right that they expected to get right, there was very little activity to observe, very little abnormal activity to observe. But when someone got a question wrong, especially when they thought they were going to get it right, mass chaos. Alarms all over the place. The brain was desperately trying to figure out, why did I get that wrong? What's the answer? How am I going to find out? And you can see that in the studies that they were doing. But this is perhaps sums it up best. It's important, but we don't really understand it very much. Okay? Because, and this is why I saw a place for the kind of conversations that we're having today, and that I've been having over the last few years. That because many of those people are doing brilliant research and never coming together to talk to each other about what they're finding. Right? And so synthesizing this work gives us a more holistic picture, not the total picture, but a more holistic picture of the importance of curiosity and what's happening when we are curious about something. We're not the only species that experiences curiosity, however. Anyone who has a dog knows that look, right? Especially when we're playing around with the treat situation, right? So there are other mammals who experience curiosity, but by far, the group that has been most studied about curiosity, other than human beings, is our closest cousins, chimpanzees. They have and the other great apes. They have been studied. Their curiosity has been studied for a very long time. When I worked at Rice in Houston, I was reading a book about the neuroscience of curiosity, and I found that someone who had studied her whole career was, for some reason, at the UT School of Dentistry, right across the street from me. And so I just reached out and asked if we could have lunch so that I could talk to her about this. Her name is Kathleen Gibson. So devoted to her research was she, that she lived for a whole year with an aide with her in her house to study its movements and how it approached things from the perspective of curiosity. That is perhaps a commitment that I am not willing to make for my research. Living with an aide for a year, but she did it. And so what she told me at that lunch has stayed with me ever since. She said, because we see curiosity in the species that are most closely related to us, it means it was there from the beginning. That our learning was fundamentally built on top of it. And we know that because we can look and see its roots in our closest cousin. So this really gets to it. We ascended as a species through incandescent curiosity, the hallmark of scientists in every century at play in the world. But curiosity was the spark of so much of that, right? And if you've ever observed a young child, I talked about when I wrote this book, my daughter was just a baby. She's 12 now, but then I was observing her. If you've ever watched a little kid exploring the world, it is driven entirely by curiosity. What's that thing? Can I put it in my mouth? Can I touch this? Right? It's all curiosity. And as they grow, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, it changes from tactile to questions. Lots and lots and lots of questions over and over and over again. Why? That's an expression of curiosity. It's learning about the world. Fundamental. But then something happens. Where does it go? Right? If that's true, and it is, what happens to it? Why do we all have experiences of working with people who may seem less than curious about the subjects that we are teaching them. Well, it doesn't go anywhere, but it fades into the background. It is less used over time. And I'm going to explain why that is. So Susan Eyler has written a lot about curiosity in education. What she shows, it's nearly universal in babies, as we talked about, but beyond early childhood, it rests with the people and the experiences that surround and shapes a child's daily life. So it is always there, but it needs to be cultivated for it to matter for learning as people grow older. Right? And so that certainly, what she's saying, has to do with our homes, but it also is about our schools as well. If children are in classrooms where curiosity is not prioritized, then it is not being cultivated as a tool for learning. And I'm not saying as college faculty, we are responsible for making people curious. What I am saying is, if we know this research, what we can use is curiosity as a tool for them to learn more effectively. Having them design projects that connect to their own interests, right? Have leading discussions with questions that are relevant to their personal lives. Those are just two really quick examples. But there are ways that we can draw that out in our own pedagogy as well. She did a very depressing study that I'll tell you about before I leave curiosity for a moment, that really exemplifies the urgency of using curiosity at the college level. And her study was, she spent a whole year, she went into 5 kindergarten classrooms in one school and 5 fifth grade classrooms in the same school over the course of the year. And she was looking for what she called instances of curiosity. She was just marking them down, really. And an instance of curiosity could be lots of things. It could be asking a question, but it could be other things, looking at a book, for example. What she found was that there weren't many instances of curiosity across the board, but that there were far more in kindergarten than there were in 5th grade, right? Suggesting, of course, something that we probably already can intuit, that over the years, school becomes less about that driving need to understand the world and much more about the logistics of curriculum and testing. That students, our kids, learn how to play the game of school so that by the time they get to college, they are already conditioned to approach it as a long list of boxes to check rather than deep and meaningful things to learn, rather than really accessing those questions that once drove them to learn so much. So curiosity, the foundation of everything. We go to sociality. Again, our social nature as human beings, we are among the most social creatures on the planet. We were joined in the upper ranks by 19 species of ants and making mole rats. So this is our elite company that we are in terms of our sociality. Social species not only thrive on living together, working together, and learning together, but it becomes a biological necessity. If you've ever seen reports on research about people who have been isolated, deprived of human company, deprived of the social interactions, a lot of it talks about not just their psychological health, but their physical, bodily health as well. It starts to deteriorate pretty rapidly. So sociality, again, is fundamental to who we are, and thus it's fundamental to how we learn. But how do we draw on that? This totally is, an I-stock image that I don't want you to think that I've had students who are working this diligently on projects, right? Because this is really the platonic ideal of a class project, one that we strive for, but is never really ever achieved, right? Look how invested they all are, right? They're working together. That guy's smiling. He's deeply curious about what's happening. This is what we hope group projects will be, but they very often are not, right? In fact, most group projects are really individual projects in sheep's clothing, right? Students get together and they deploy strategically. You do part A, I'll do part B, you do part C, and we'll present on that. They don't work together, they just present together, or they write the final project together. But learning that is amplified by our sociality depends on learning in ways that we need other people in order to advance our knowledge together. So in a perfect world, in a well-designed class discussion, this is supposed to be what happens, right? That we ask questions, maybe we don't know the full answer to, or really don't know the answer to at all. And together, we and the students are building that knowledge. And none of us have the entire answer. We need each other for parts of all of it in order to build the knowledge. Right? And there are other ways to think about that. But the result, or I think the moral of the story is we have to find ways that where we are able to maximize students working together. And this is becoming much harder than it was when I started to research the book in 2015, right? COVID literally put distance between us all. It changed even more than it already was, the social dynamics of the classroom and the way people worked with each other. Now we have other challenges as well that are building on top of that. And so I'm here to say that this is vital and important, but without clear answers as to how at this moment we can undo some of the things that have already been done. I think what we need to do is look to the future, look and think about, given our current setting, given our current circumstances, our moment in time in the classroom, how can we get students to work more effectively with each other? Technology, a great partner for this. I use, for example, Perusal in all my classes where they're annotating socially the texts that we use. Was one answer that I had for my particular courses that I teach. So ways to think about how we can get students working together effectively. Emotion. This is by far the most interesting part of working on this project for me. We don't talk about emotion very well in higher education. In fact, whenever the conversation begins to veer toward emotion and teaching, people are like this. No boundaries. I'm a teacher. That's it. But that's not really what we're talking about here. The science of emotion and cognition shows us that the two are like dance partners following the same choreography. That cognition needs emotion, emotion needs cognition in order to be maximized, right? And what I'd like you to take away from this is really two things. Number one, positive emotions can heighten student learning. So when students feel like they are cared for and they are happy in the classroom, like they're enthusiastic, they learn more. The research is really clear about it. When they feel like they're a part of the environment, a meaningful part of the environment, they simply learn more. So heightened positive emotions, good for learning. On the other side of the coin, when negative emotions reach a point where a student is no longer able to regulate them, cognition shuts down, right? When a negative emotion reaches a point where a student is no longer able to regulate it, cognition shuts down. And you can do anything you wanted as a teacher, try to explain it 97 different ways, it's still not going to matter until that emotional response drops down. Now, that doesn't mean that we're supposed to understand emotionally what every one of our students is going through. It does allow us, I think, to have a better understanding, though, of student responses that we are seeing in our classroom and how they might affect learning. It also means that thinking about our students, not just as numbers, but as human beings, really matters. When someone's mom is sick or when their car breaks down on the way to campus, they can't just drop that off at the door and go in and learn history or calculus. It's going to affect the way they're processing information. And being aware of that, I think, is amazingly important for us as faculty, people who care about learning. This came out a month after, roughly a month, maybe two after campuses shut down for COVID. I still have this because it showed how serious things were at the very beginning, right? That already 40% of those were saying they faced major disruption. Where is it here? Lives were significantly disrupted. The things were already very difficult at the very beginning, and they only got worse along the way, right? That students, in many ways, are still reckoning from the fallout emotionally, physically, all sorts of in terms of their sociality, things from their experience during the pandemic, and that we need to think about because while those students, the 2020 students who we were teaching, have graduated, we are now getting students who a lot of their high school and middle school experience were shaped by what happened during the pandemic. So understanding the emotional contours of teaching and learning is really important. It does not mean that you have to be their friend. It doesn't mean you have to develop or get rid of boundaries that make you more comfortable. It simply means understanding the landscape of our students that are in our classes at any time. Authenticity is simply the degree to which a learning experience resembles real-world context, right? Undergraduate research is a great example of this. A biology class going out into the field to identify bugs in their natural habitat, that's a good example of this. But what I have up here is a simulation. And so we have a real plane on the left and a flight simulator on the right. And that's because some of the most interesting research on authentic learning has been the effect of simulations in learning. That these are two very different contexts. One much more dangerous than the other, right? But both of them have what we call cognitive authenticity. That flying in a plane and being in a flight simulator, at least as our brains respond to it, are very similar experiences. And so the research on simulations, especially in the health professions, has been really, really revolutionary and quite surprising here. So some of it, a lot of the simulation research happens in nursing education, people learning via simulation versus real patients. Some of it has to do with physician training. And there's one particular study, longitudinal study, looking at surgeons and the number of errors they made early in their career. And it tracked two groups. One, the group of surgeons who learned the traditional way on cadavers, and one group who learned in simulations. And they found that over time, the surgeons who learned in a simulation committed fewer errors during actual surgery than those who learned in cadavers. Now, there could be a lot of potential reasons for that. One is that the simulation can be adaptable. It can change and often throw you curveballs within the simulation that you might not be able to experience if you're working on a cadaver, which is the first thing. A simulation feels a lot safer. This is why a flight simulator works as well. That you feel it's okay to make a mistake, because if you do, no one's going to die. Right? And that's a real thing for pilots and nurses and surgeons. Right? So authenticity matters. And what that means for our classes, how can we make our classrooms feel like more authentic learning experiences, things that scholars in our disciplines are doing? I teach in teacher education now. I was trained as a medievalist. It's been a twisty pathway for me. But so when I was teaching medieval literature, I would take them to, I would look at medieval manuscripts. Right? That was one way that I tried to make things more authentic. There are lots and lots of ways, using real data sets in your courses, for example. Lots of ways to do this. And it's not necessarily wholesale recalculation of what you're doing, but let's say this is an important for learning. Our brains are really good at turning off the switch when they don't think that it's in an authentic learning context, right? But they'll just devote attentional resources elsewhere. All right, finally, I'm on a real happy note here. Failure. Everyone likes to talk about failure in higher education, but we celebrate it often. But failure is one of our most important tools for learning. Our brain is set up to respond to and to learn from failure. Now I have like sets of letters here that there's no way you need to know or to remember, but they indicate two signal processes that are in our brains, solely designed to catch errors. And when they catch an error, they buzz essentially and direct cognitive resources to figuring out what happened. Right? Learning from failure is a feature, not a bug, of the way we learn, the way our brains work. Which means that we need to use that information. We have designed school systems that operate in exactly the opposite direction. We have school systems that demonize failure rather than uphold. What does this mean? It simply means that if we can create class context where it feels safer to try something out, get feedback, and try it again, which is the natural way that we all learn something. If you think about something that you're really good at, think about the way we learn to get good at it. That was the way it happened. You tried something, you made a mistake, someone who knew more than you came in and said, try this, then you tried it again, and you learn. That's the way it happens. But that requires a tolerance for error, a tolerance for failure, and that can mean everything from thinking about how much our assignments are weighted. It can mean giving students opportunities to try exams again or exam questions for certain numbers of points return to that. Right? It can mean lots of different things. But this is one of the things that is most interwoven into the way students see school of all kinds. And that is failure is bad. It looks like this. Bright red letters screaming to them lots of different messages about who they are as a learner. Right? That students themselves have internalized failure as being a negative thing. And so it requires us to deprogram that in many ways. But that means rethinking our approach to our course design and our pedagogy at the same time. All right, so we have a couple minutes left. I'm gonna at least try and fit in the technology nature of this conference, because I think it is important. So how do we fit this in? Technology should always enhance learning and never diminish it. And I know we know that, but I just thought it was worth saying that each of those things we just talked about can be absolutely supported and enhanced by technology. Right? There are tools out there that many of which you all know about that augment that learning, augment the curiosity, augment the sociality, augment the emotion. And then those tools can enhance learning. But there are also ways that technology can get in the way of learning as well. So we need to be careful as we make the calculation of what we use and how we use it. Number two, technology should augment our sociality, not obstruct it. Right? So we need to use technology in ways that will draw on those social connections, not further separate us. Okay? How do we do that in all of our courses? How do we think about ways to bring the social into it? The one solution that, or several solutions, especially if you're teaching online, for example, having students see you as much as possible, having students see their peers through video responses, etc., as much as possible. They need to feel like they're in some sort of, they're actually in a social environment, because again, that will enhance learning. So we wanted to augment that sociality, not obstruct it. And I think that there are possibilities and there are dangers there as well. And then this is my big one. Again, I know that there are 100 people in here. There are 100 different perspectives on AI in education right now, right? But I'm open with innovations. I think that it's so new right now that it's a very obscure kind of playing field, a strange landscape at the moment. What I would just say is a plea for caution rooted in what I was just explaining. There's work coming out, and again, this is all nascent research. So you could see one day one paper that says AI supports learning in this particular context, and the next day a new paper will come out and say AI is detrimental to learning in that same context. It's hard to use the research right now because it's so nascent. And that's the moment we are in where both innovation and caution are warranted at the same time. So there has been some work cautioning about cognitive offloading with AI. So what we were just talking about, the process of learning, it is hard and it is deeply complex. Right? And so as we think about integrating AI or using AI or not, whatever your approach may be, what we want to keep in mind is how difficult that process is. And like anything difficult, students need to practice those parts that are most difficult about learning. If we start to offload the difficult parts, then those never get the chance to actually be developed over time. Think of it like a muscle. The more you work a muscle, the stronger it gets. Once you stop working on it, it begins to atrophy. Learning is much the same way. So if you continue to work the critical thinking muscle as a student, it will continue to get stronger. If you use the technology to offload some of the critical thinking, it will begin to atrophy. And I think that is maybe the one caution flag about AI. I could have some more, but that's one that I would like to raise at this moment. That we need to be careful that we are preserving the parts of the learning process that are the most meaningful, the most challenging, and the most difficult for students to develop. And if we're integrating AI as partners or as supplements to think about what are the aspects of learning that students don't have to work as hard at, maybe AI will take on some of that challenge, right? A works cited page, as you all know from publishing things, the style has changes for every journal and everything that you publish, right? So actually teaching someone a works cited style, you know, there's debate about the relevance of that. Yes, I think there's probably good reasons to do it, but maybe things like that don't require the same kind of lift of learning, that's a potential for innovation, right? But I think we just simply want to be careful, especially as research is so nascent at the moment, how we think about the role of technology, specifically of AI in the classroom. Because the one thing I want to come back to from the very beginning of this talk, this is a really deeply challenging time for all of us in higher education. The one thing that we have is our work with students. We cannot let anything stand in the way of that. Thank you very much. And we have 14 minutes for Q&A. There are some mics on either side. I think that's the plan, but I'm also happy passing it around with that green light. Shield my eyes.
What drives the change in curiosity as we get older? Because what you tend to see, at least in my experience, is developing curiosity during high school, whether it's college, and a recognition of it for graduates.
Right, well, and that's a great question. In graduate school, of course, it's very self-selected kind of learning experience, right? Largely made up of people who could persevere through our education system to be successful. But so what drives that? What drives the drop in curiosity, especially in high school? I think that there are a number of things, actually. It goes back to the quote about our environments and the people who surround us. It's having the biggest effect on our curiosity. If we think about some of the things that are happening in school districts across the country, so I have this as someone who teaches in teacher education, I have this internal pull always. I'm the biggest fan of teachers, future and current, and the biggest critic of school districts, right? And the reason for that, one is the emphasis, and then states, really, right? One reason for that, the emphasis on state to state. I don't know if you've heard this about Mississippi, but we're not rated very highly on the list of education. We recently climbed a couple of spots in what was called the Mississippi Miracle because of our students scoring higher on their English and math tests, especially in third grade, right? Now, the problem, as someone with a child in my school system, is that all of the teaching is geared toward the test. Every bit of it is geared toward the test. All the assessments are potential test questions. All the standards are tied to what will be asked on the test, with the goal of increasing the test scores so that we can climb another place or two up the ranks, right? So that may not be the case in New York. It's probably not the case in New York, but it is also true that state level assessments, and I know there's some interesting things with the Regents exam recently, right? Maybe not the question. But anyway, it may not be the case in New York, but it's still true that state assessments are shaping so much of what happens in the classrooms. That's one thing. The other thing you might not know about, or maybe you do, but we're seeing it, we're starting to see it right now in the first group of students coming to us as freshmen whose entire school experience has been shaped by the Common Core and the box curriculum that is purchased by school districts that's tied to the Common Core, right? Now, it is often the case that school districts are not creating their own curricula anymore. They purchase curriculum that is developed in alignment with both the state standards and the Common Core. And that is, it's not a curiosity-based curriculum, right? It is very much a logistical, very utilitarian approach to teaching and learning people. So if we're thinking about what happens in high school, that those two things I think are at the top of my list currently, according to, in addition to what has always been the case, that students become strategic learners. What do I have to do to get into the college that I want to get into? And I'm just going to do that and nothing more, because that's my goal, right? And then I get to college, what do I have to do to get the GPA and the career that I want, or into the graduate school that I want? And that's what they do. And so curiosity is not prioritized in any of those kinds of conditions, which is why it behooves us to think about ways that we can draw it back out.
So my question is, how does neurodivergence and trauma fit into this picture? Because both of those in educational contests kind of create shut down. And when you're shut down, you're not curious. You're sort of not talking about. So, yeah, I'm just curious, like in your research, how did you find that idea?
Yeah, it's great. So let's start with trauma. In the research on emotion and the regulation of emotion, one of the hot button topics that comes up over and over again is the use of trigger or content warnings in the classroom. And there are groups of people who are adamantly opposed to trigger warnings or content warnings, feeling as if we're somehow dumbing down the work of the classroom or being too soft on students or something like that. But what I would say, especially with respect to trauma, what the research shows us is that a trigger or content warning is what I would call, very unromantically, a pre-regulatory mechanism. And I think if we just started calling them that, people would stop arguing, right? How do you argue with a pre-regulatory mechanism? What I mean by that is it allows you to regulate your emotion before you get to the topic or the story or the poem or the movie that is potentially going to reignite or trigger some of that trauma to begin with, right? And so it allows all students to participate in the work of the classroom because you are giving them a chance to address the emotional regulation or the trauma before it has occurred, right? Now, there may still be students who have PTSD and other kinds of traumatic experiences for whom that will not be enough. But it is a way to think about our classrooms as being trauma aware and responding to those students, those many, many students who come to our classrooms with trauma. Neurodivergence, so I think the marriage of the research on how learning works with the frameworks like universal design for learning, things like that, that intersection is where I look when I begin to think of how do we best teach for our neurodivergent students as well. Understanding that neurodivergence is a huge umbrella, right? And so when I was writing the more recent book on grades, for example, I was trying to address how do alternative grading practices work for neurodivergent students? And what I found was it depended on what kind of neurodivergence we were talking about, right? So we're talking about autistic students. Some autistic students need more structure, and some grading models would work better for that than others. Some don't love that and respond differently to structure, and so other models would work better for that. I think it's the same with the science of learning. So understanding the basic principles of emotion and emotional regulation, for example, or curiosity, you may have students who are autistic, you may have students who, for example, have OCD, who focus intently on topics or subjects or areas of deep personal interest to them. And understanding that in light of both emotion and curiosity, I think helps make us better teachers at the same time. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'm Rachel Beston, I'm an educational developer here at CIT and I'm wondering if you could talk about how your research and what you were talking about today has influenced the program you offer out of your teaching and learning center.
Great. Okay, sure. In a couple of ways. So first, all of the programming that we do is rooted in the latest research on teaching and learning. So that is a foundational principle for us that we want that to be clear. All of our particular programming each year is different because we respond directly to what faculty tell us our areas of interest, and then we fill in with some of this kind of programming as well. But so we have had workshops, we have had lead groups, we have had learning communities that are tied to these kinds of research-based models, so that faculty have those tools that they can bring in and then be creative and work within their disciplinary context. So I think the larger answer to your question is that we look less at techniques and more at research-based frameworks for how faculty can be best armed with that research to develop the techniques and use the other techniques that we can help point them to. So I think that's a big part of it. We try to, so for example, last year, the faculty surveys that we gave out pointed to the fact that there was going to be an election, and that it might be hard to teach in the context of an election. And so they wanted a lot of programming about teaching during difficult times, leading difficult discussions, all the things that might come up. And we did look to that literature, but we also drew on this as well. What happens to a student in the days after the election, regardless of how they voted, sitting in the classroom, feeling all those things? What might their responses be, and how might that affect their learning? So we do bring that to bear, even with the topics that we draw from the faculty surveys as well.
One of the areas that really kind of caught my attention for your talk, again, it was a really great talk, was with the scientific mind, the aspect of failure there. And so my question is about, in the classroom, how to best both kind of leave space for failure for the students, and then also how to encourage students to embrace failure as part of the process. There, what your thoughts are.
Right, yes. The second one is tougher than the first one. The second point, how do we help students embrace this, right? I think there are all kinds of small and large changes that we can make to course design to make room for this. You know, whether it be restructuring the overall percentages of different things, or you know, I'm just going to pick a model that is more recent that I've really come to admire, especially in the STEM disciplines. Group testing, the group testing situations where students take a test the first time on their own, then they take it again in groups and have the opportunity to merge those grades together. So they're not only does that draw on the sociality, but also it releases the pressure valve on some of the failure aspects, right? So lots of different ways that you can do that, but ultimately it comes back to your second question: how do we help students learn how to do this? Because they've had at least 12 years of school, 13 in some cases, teaching them that failure is bad, that they have to get it right on the first try. And so some of that, I think, this is also true, by the way, of the things I've been working on more recently on grades. They also are cultivated into thinking about grades in certain ways. Some of it is just talking to them and working with them on that over the course of the semester, right? It isn't a one and done kind of conversation. It's something to which you have to return. I will often bring in research to help support it and show them why it matters, why it's relevant. That's part of it. Another part of it is modeling it ourselves. And that can look like whatever's most comfortable for you. Mistakes that you have made. When I got the readers' reports back for the book, I brought it into a course I was teaching, and I said, "Here's what people have said about this, and here's how I am thinking about these comments and revision," because we had just been talking about revision. So it wasn't all positive. So part of it was being honest about the fact that none of this is a straight path. It's either success or failure. There's a lot of twists and turns in that. So modeling is a part of it as well. Thinking about the feedback that we give to really communicate the value of trying something out. Yeah, great idea. I'm not sure it really worked this time, but keep pushing on it. Try this approach and this approach next time. So helping them to see mistakes as not the end of the story, but maybe the beginning of the next story. And actually, again, Brian Dewsbury will be there. He's working on a big project on feedback in undergraduate biology courses, and they're really thinking a lot about how do you use feedback to send these messages to students. Really motivating. Thank you. Okay, one more friend. Hi.
So in the very beginning, you ended up talking about the various types of, basically those kind of three main points. And I wanted to ask about learning strategies when students are coming in for the first time and they're coming against the learning strategy they're not aware of, with, and need to adapt to in order to take in the information. What would your recommendations for assisting the student overcome and push past new and different learning techniques, especially what may be something they're comfortable with or something that creates a lot of emotional stress?
That's a really great question. I'm thinking that there are two categories of solutions. One is individual and one is departmental, maybe even college-wide, depending on what we're talking about here. Individual, I think when you look at work that has been done on this question and questions like it, the clear answer that emerges over and over again is if you want students to become good at something, you have to give them opportunities to practice over and over again, right? So if this learning strategy that we're talking about here is vital to their success, they need opportunities to practice it, both with you for your feedback, although that doesn't have to take up a ton of time, and also in their homework and the work that they do outside. They need to practice it And if even the practicing does not get them where they need to be, pointing them to resources, learning resources that can help them. So that's the kind of individual category, but departmentally, or even kind of college or school-wide, if you as a department are noticing that a lot of your students are having difficulty with this particular learning strategy, whatever it might be, developing some sort of workshop that students go to before the semester begins, or in the middle of the semester, or it's hard to say without knowing exactly what we're talking about, but identifying this as a priority, understanding that students are really struggling with it, and so giving them the help that they need to best set them up for success, right? One of the things our collective STEM departments are in the middle of identifying is that the students who are experiencing less success in introductory STEM courses, it is largely because of quantitative literacy. That across the board, physics, chemistry, biology, that it is rooted in quantitative literacy, and some students not having, for a variety of reasons, coming in with lower levels of quantitative literacy. So we're just starting to talk about how do we address that. Let's not have each instructor do this on their own. Let's think about a kind of STEM-wide workshop that we could invite students to at some point. Again, we're just thinking about it now, but that's the kind of like holistic solution that we could think about this. Well, thank you all very much. That's my email here. That's my email address. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments. Keep the conversation going. Have a great conference, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank
It
you.
really was.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, let's give Josh Eyler another round of applause for that wonderful presentation.